The late autumn sky had been warning Lena Walsh all afternoon. First with a gray haze on the horizon, then with the uneasy stillness that made even the grass hold its breath. But she had pressed forward anyway, urging her tired mule along the rutted trail, hoping she could reach the next settlement before nightfall. Hope, she was learning, was far lighter to carry than fear, but it didn't stop fear from following her like a shadow. By the time the sun dipped, the storm finally broke. The first raindrop struck her cheek like a cold slap. The next came harder, faster, until the sky opened fully and transformed the world into rushing sheets of silver. Lena jerked on the reins, trying to coax the mule under the nearest cluster of cottonwoods. The wind roared, bending the treetops as if trying to wrench them out of the earth. Thunder cracked so close it rattled the wagon wheels. She knew then she wasn't making it to town. She might not make it anywhere tonight. The wagon lurched suddenly, and she felt the axle give way beneath her, first a groan, then a sharp, snapping crack. The wagon tilted cruelly to one side, sending crates tumbling. Lena scrambled out before the whole thing collapsed, her boots splashing into mud. It was over. She was stranded. The rain chilled her through her coat in seconds. She looked around, blinking water out of her eyes. But the prairie stretched endlessly in every direction, dark, rolling, indifferent. The storm had swallowed the world. "Please," she whispered to herself, though she didn't know whether she meant a prayer or a plea for strength. With trembling hands, Lena pulled the canvas tarp from the back of the wagon and tried to rig it between the fallen wheel and the ground. The wind tore at it, nearly ripping it from her grip. She cursed under her breath as her fingers went numb. Finally, she managed to pin one corner under a crate and crouched beneath the makeshift shelter. It wasn't shelter. Not really. The rain still found her. The cold still seeped through every seam of her clothes. But it was something, a thin barrier between her and the wild fury of the storm. The loneliness, however, was a different beast. It pressed in on her more heavily than the rain. Out here, with nothing but the scream of the wind and the pounding of thunder, she felt how small she truly was. How alone. No walls, no voices, no warm fire. Just her breath turning to mist, her heart thudding loudly in her ears. Lightning flashed, illuminating the vast emptiness around her. For a moment she saw the broken wheel, the mule hunched miserably, the wavering horizon, and then darkness swallowed it all again. She hugged her arms around herself, curling tighter beneath the wagon. She had left her old life behind, left the safety of her hometown, left the man she could not force herself to marry, left every comfort she had ever known. She had chosen this. Freedom, uncertainty, a chance to build something of her own. But tonight, freedom felt like a cruel joke. The storm howled. The tarp flapped so violently she feared it would tear free and leave her exposed. Her teeth chattered. Her eyes burned from fatigue. She closed them, just for a moment, letting the sound of the storm drown her thoughts. And that was when she heard it, soft at first, almost lost in the wind. A distant cry. Not thunder. Not an animal. A baby. Lena's eyes snapped open. Someone else was out there, in the storm. Somewhere in the darkness. At first, Lena thought her mind was playing tricks on her. Storms did strange things to sound, stretched them, swallowed them, twisted them so that even the wind seemed to speak. But then the cry came again, clearer this time, high-pitched, urgent, fragile, a baby, definitely a baby. Lena pushed herself upright, squinting through the sheets of rain. Her heart hammered, torn between dread and instinct. Who in their right mind would be traveling with an infant in weather like this? The cry rose again, a thin, desperate wail that pierced the storm's roar. She swallowed hard. Every sensible part of her said to stay put under the sagging tarp, to keep what little cover she had. But the other part, the part that hadn't yet been hardened by the frontier, wouldn't to let her ignore a helpless child. Clutching the canvas tight around her shoulders, she crawled out from under the wagon. The wind hit her like a physical blow, nearly knocking her off balance. Mud sucked at her boots. Lightning flashed overhead, turning the world white for a heartbeat. There, just beyond the dying cottonwoods, she glimpsed movement. A shifting glow, bobbing violently in the darkness. A lantern. Lena froze, uncertain whether to call out. A lantern meant people. People meant risk. Every warning she'd ever heard about outlaws, drifters, and desperate men rang through her mind. She wasn't naive enough to believe everyone out here had good intentions. But the baby's cry cut through those fears. Someone needed help. "Hello?" she shouted over the wind. Her voice sounded small, swallowed by thunder. "Is someone out there?" The lantern stopped moving. For a moment, silence hung heavy, broken only by rain hammering the earth. Then the shape holding the lantern moved closer. A horse's silhouette materialized first, followed by the broad shoulders of the rider astride it. "Who's there?" A man's voice called, deep and wary. Lena's pulse kicked. She tightened her grip on the tarp, hugging it around her shivering body. "My wagon broke," she called back. "I heard a baby." Lightning cracked again, and this time she saw them clearly. A tall man on horseback, rain streaming from the brim of his hat and down the soaked collar of his coat. In the crook of one arm, held close against his chest, was a small bundle crying loudly and relentlessly. And beside his saddle, tied by a rope, a calf trotted nervously, its wide eyes reflecting the lantern light. The stranger guided his horse closer, still cautious. "You alone out here?" he asked, voice raised over the storm. "Yes," Lena answered, though fear made the word tremble. "My wagon axle snapped. I don't have shelter." He swept the lantern's light over her wagon, the mule, the flapping tarp, and finally her soaked figure. The sight seemed to settle something in him. The wariness in his eyes softened. "Name's Caleb Harwood," he said. "Storm spooked a calf out of my herd. Been chasing it half the night." He bounced the bundle lightly, trying to calm the baby. "And this one hasn't stopped hollering since the thunder started." The infant let out another shrill wail, tiny fists waving. Lena's heart ached at the sound. Caleb glanced toward the dark horizon, then back at her. "You can't stay out here," he said firmly. "Storm's only getting worse." Lena hesitated, torn between distrust and desperation. She didn't know this man. Didn't know if he was safe. But one look at the crying baby, red-faced, trembling, soaked from the ride made her decision for her. "Please," she said softly. "Help us." Caleb nodded once, decisive. "Come on then," he said, extending a hand. "I'll get you both out of this hell of a night." And with the next rumble of thunder, Lena stepped toward the lantern glow toward the stranger and his child, never imagining how deeply this stormy night would bind their fates. Caleb steadied his horse as Lena approached, his large hand outstretched, palm open, a gesture that was both practical and reassuring. The lantern hanging from his saddle illuminated his face in flashes, revealing a man shaped by weather, work, and quiet burdens. His jaw was strong but unshaven, his eyes shadowed with fatigue and responsibility. He wasn't young, not like the groom Lena had fled from, but something in his expression told her he knew hardship well. The baby in his arm cried louder as thunder cracked overhead. Caleb murmured something low and soothing to the child, bouncing her gently even in the saddle. The calmness with which he held the infant eased some of Lena's fear. A cruel man didn't cradle a baby like that, not with tenderness worn in every motion. Still, as she placed her hand in his, her stomach twisted with nerves. She was giving trust to a stranger in the wilderness, and she knew too well that trust could be a dangerous gamble. Caleb helped her step onto a fallen log so she could mount behind him. She moved awkwardly, soaked skirt clinging to her legs, boots slipping in the mud. He gripped her elbow firmly to steady her. Once she settled on the back of the horse, she kept her hands tight around the small bundle of tarp she'd clung to for warmth. Caleb glanced over his shoulder. "Hold on," he said. "It's a rough ride in this weather." Lena hesitated only a second before wrapping her arms around his waist. The contact startled her. His coat was cold and dripping, but underneath she felt solid heat, the kind that belonged to someone who'd worked the land his whole life. She tried to keep her grip polite, distant, but a strong gust of wind made the horse sidestep, and she instinctively held him tighter. Caleb didn't comment. He simply clicked his tongue, guiding the horse forward, leading the frightened calf by the rope. The prairie looked different from higher up endless waves of darkness, broken only by glimpses of lightning carving brief shapes into the landscape. Rain battered Lena's face, and she lowered her cheek to Caleb's back to shield herself. The baby still whimpered, but the motion of the horse seemed to calm her slightly. "How far is your home?" Lena shouted over the storm. "Couple miles," he answered. "Less if the creek hasn't overflowed." A fresh knot of worry formed in her chest. She imagined the creek, swollen and raging, blocking their path. She imagined being stranded again, this time with a baby and a stranger whose safety she had no way of knowing. Caleb sensed her tension. "Don't worry," he added. "I know these lands. Been ridden 'em my whole life." Lena said nothing, but she felt a small flicker of trust. Not enough to feel safe, but enough to keep fear from swallowing her. As the horse trotted through the mud, Lena took in more of the man in front of her. His coat was worn at the seams. His hat, though battered, shielded the baby more than himself. Every few moments he'd tilt his head toward the child, checking her cries, adjusting his grip. The tenderness wasn't showy. It was instinct. "You travelin' alone?" Caleb asked after a long moment. She stiffened. "Yes." "Heading where?" "I'm not sure anymore." It was the closest she could come to the truth. He didn't press further, and she felt a wash of relief. The storm continued to pummel them, but the steady rhythm of Caleb's horse cut through the chaos. Slowly, Lena's trembling eased not from comfort, but from sheer exhaustion. As they crested a small rise, a faint glow appeared in the distance. Not lantern light, not lightning. A homestead, warm, solid, waiting through the storm. Caleb pointed toward it. "There," he said. "Harwood Ranch." Lena exhaled shakily, barely aware that she'd been holding her breath. For the first time that night, hope flickered, and she had no idea that crossing that simple threshold would change the rest of her life. The closer they drew to the homestead, the more sharply the lantern light from its windows cut through the storm. It wasn't bright, more a soft amber glow, flickering against rain-streaked glass, but to Lena, it looked like the promise of survival. The structure stood sturdy against the wind, a long, low ranch house flanked by a barn and a small corral, all built with the kind of practicality that came from generations of knowing how cruel the frontier could be. As Caleb brought the horse to a stop beside the porch, the storm howled around them, but for the first time since her wagon axle snapped, Lena felt the possibility of warmth, safety, walls. Caleb dismounted with practiced ease, his boots splashing into the mud. The baby whimpered at the sudden shift, her tiny face scrunched with distress as rain pelted her again. Lena slid down next, awkward from cold, clinging briefly to Caleb's arm so she wouldn't fall. He steadied her, not roughly, not with hesitation, but with the same instinctive gentleness he used with his daughter. "You head inside," he said over the rain. "Get warm. I'll take care of the horse and calf." Lena hesitated on the bottom porch step. She didn't want to leave him in the storm, but the wind was slicing through her clothes like knives. "I can help." "No," he said, shaking his head. "You're soaked through and shaking." "Go on." The firmness in his tone wasn't harsh, just certain. Certain in a way that made her obey before she could argue. With one last glance at him, at the way he tucked the baby against his chest, shielding her from the rain, Lena hurried up the steps. The porch creaked under her boots. She pushed open the front door and warm air hit her like a physical embrace. Inside, the ranch house was simple. A main room with a hearth at the far wall, a sturdy table, a few chairs, and a rocking chair draped with a quilt. The fire in the hearth was burning steadily, flames crackling as if welcoming her. The soft scent of wood smoke and something faintly sweet, maybe stew or baked cornmeal, hung in the air. Lena stood dripping on the wooden floor, afraid to move too much, afraid to dirty anything. She had been raised to be respectful in others' homes, and this place, though modest, felt well loved. She drew off her wet gloves and held her hands toward the fire, wincing as warmth returned to her numb fingers. Her clothes were still soaked, heavy and clinging, but she didn't dare start shedding layers without permission. She simply stood there, trembling, letting the fire thaw the parts of her she'd feared would stay frozen forever. A moment later, the door opened behind her. Caleb entered, drenched but composed, the baby now calmer in his arms. He shut the door firmly, shutting out the storm's roar. Instantly, the room felt smaller, warmer, more intimate. "Sorry for the state of things," he said, removing his hat and shaking off water. "Didn't expect company tonight." Lena managed a faint smile. "It's more than I could have hoped for." He paused at that. She saw a flicker of something cross his face, empathy, maybe, or understanding. Then he moved to the rocking chair and gently settled the baby into it, tucking a crocheted blanket around her small form. "This here's Mary," he said quietly. Storms got her all riled. At the sound of her father's voice, Mary's cries softened to little hiccups. Lena felt her heart squeeze. She had always had a softness for children, though her life had never allowed space for any. Caleb turned back to her. "You need dry clothes." "I can get you something of my wife's." Lena stiffened at the word wife's, but before she could speak, he added, his tone gentler, "She passed last winter." A hush settled between them. The fire popped softly. "I'm sorry," Lena whispered. He nodded once, accepting the sympathy without dwelling on it. "This place can get mighty lonely," he said. "Storm nights are the worst. Lonely." She understood that intimately. Without meaning to, her eyes drifted around the room, the single woman-sized rocking chair, the folded quilts, the lone cradle tucked in the corner, small signs of a life that once filled these walls. Caleb cleared his throat. "I'll fetch you those clothes. Make yourself comfortable by the fire." As he disappeared into the back room, Lena sank onto a stool, letting the warmth finally seep into her bones. She watched the baby sleep, watched the flames dance, and felt, for the first time in a long while, that she wasn't completely adrift in the world. She was inside a home. And though she didn't know it yet, this home would soon feel like hers too. When Caleb returned, he carried a folded stack of clothes in one hand and a towel thrown over his shoulder. He set them gently on the table beside Lena, as if placing something fragile. "They belong to my wife," he said, voice low but steady. "You're welcome to use them for the night. They're clean." Lena's fingers hovered over the garments without touching them. A soft cotton dress, a knitted shawl, a long flannel nightshirt. The kind of clothes that looked lived in, warmed by memories. Borrowing them felt strangely intimate, almost intrusive. She looked up. "Are you sure?" Caleb nodded. She'd want someone to have use of them. That simple sentence held both grief and generosity, and Lena felt her throat tighten. He turned a little, giving her space without leaving the room completely. "You can change in the back bedroom," he said. "It's warmer near the stovepipe." Lena gathered the clothes and the towel, murmuring her thanks. As she walked down the small hallway, she felt the warmth from the fire fading, replaced by the soft quiet of a lived-in home. The bedroom was neat, the quilt tucked tight, a small wooden hairbrush resting on the knit stand. She shut the door gently behind her and let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. As she dried herself and slipped into the borrowed clothes, a strange mix of emotions settled over her. She felt safer than she had in weeks, safer than she'd admit out loud, but she also felt the ghost of another woman lingering in the room. Someone who had once loved this home, this man, this child. Someone she would never know, but whose presence wrapped around the house like faint perfume. When she re-entered the main room, Caleb looked up from where he'd been stirring something on the stove. His eyes softened, almost imperceptibly. "They fit you well," he said. Lena tucked a strand of damp hair behind her ear. "Thank you. They're very comfortable. Sit," he urged, nodding toward the hearth. "You need something hot in you." Mary was quiet now, curled in the rocking chair with her fist tucked under her cheek. The baby's peaceful face eased something in Lena's chest. She found herself drawn toward the child, unable to resist pausing at her side. Mary's hair was dark and soft, her lashes long, her little breath steady. When Lena touched the edge of the blanket, Mary shifted slightly, her mouth forming a tiny pout. "You're good with her," Caleb said behind her. Lena glanced over her shoulder. "I always liked children. I helped raise my younger cousins back home." "Home," he repeated. "Where was that?" "A long way east," Lena said quietly. "Feels even farther now." Caleb didn't push for more, and she was grateful. She needed time before sharing the full truth about the engagement she'd run from, the expectations that choked her, the miserable certainty that marriage to the wrong man would have destroyed her spirit. Instead, Caleb ladled a steaming bowl of stew and handed it to her. "Ain't much," he said, "but it's hot." She accepted it eagerly, wrapping her hands around the warm bowl. The stew was simple potatoes, beans, bits of beef, but after the freezing storm, it tasted like the best food she'd ever had. Caleb sat opposite her at the table, close enough that the heat of the fire bathed them both. They ate in comfortable silence at first, the kind that forms naturally between people who understand hardship. Finally, Caleb asked, "What sent you traveling alone?" "Most folks don't take to crossing the prairie without company." Lena hesitated. She could lie. She could give him an easy answer. But something about the steady, patient way he watched her made honesty slip out instead. "I needed a new start," she said. "One that didn't involve being someone else's property." Caleb's jaw tightened, not in judgment, but in understanding. "A woman's got the right to choose her own life," he said simply. Those words, so quietly spoken, warmed her more than the fire. The storm raged outside, but in that moment, the small ranch house felt like a sanctuary to weary souls sitting close, sharing food, sharing silence, and without speaking it, sharing the first threads of something neither expected. A quiet connection had begun. By morning, the storm had blown itself out, leaving behind the stillness that made the world feel scrubbed clean. The yard glistened with rainwater, puddles reflecting the soft gold of dawn. Birds chirped with the renewed confidence of creatures who'd survived a rough night, and the air smelled of wet earth and pine sap. Lena woke slowly, warmly, wrapped in the borrowed quilt from Caleb's late wife. The bed was softer than she expected, the mattress molded by years of use, and for a moment, just a moment, she forgot where she was. Then she remembered the storm, the baby's cries, the steady warmth of Caleb's home, and she sat up with a mix of gratitude and uncertainty. She dressed in her still damp clothes, the chill of the fabric reminding her she wouldn't be staying long. She needed the wagon repaired. She needed to move on. She couldn't risk relying too much on the comfort she'd found here. Comfort had a way of convincing a person to stay somewhere they didn't belong. When she entered the main room, she found Caleb already up, boots on, coat hung by the door. He was stirring a pot on the stove, sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing tan forearms roped with muscle from long days of ranch work. Mary lay in a cradle beside him, cooing to herself, well rested now that the thunder had ceased. Caleb looked up at the sound of Lena's footsteps. "Mornin'," he said, tipping his head. "Morning," she echoed, smoothing her damp skirt self-consciously. He nodded toward the stove. Got some coffee. Breakfast, too. Figured you'd be hungry. You figured right, she admitted with a small smile. He returned it, just a quick tug at the corner of his mouth, but enough to make something flutter inside her chest. After a quiet breakfast, Caleb took steps toward the back door. I'm going to see to your wagon axle, he said. It'll take time to fix. You're welcome to wait here. Lena hesitated. She hated imposing, but she also had nowhere to go. I appreciate it. I can help with chores, if you'll let me. He paused, giving her an assessing look, not suspicious, but measuring. All right, he said finally. I won't argue with help, and so the rhythm of the day began. She started helping without being asked. Lena washed dishes while Mary watched her from the cradle, occasionally fussing until Lena leaned over to make faces or sing small forgotten lullabies. The baby giggled tiny peals of sound that startled Lena with their sweetness. When the morning sun began to warm the yard, Caleb returned from the barn with a bucket of tools and grease on his hands. I'll need to fetch new wood for the axle, he said. Might take a few days. That's fine, Lena said, though her heart pounded. A few days. Enough time to grow comfortable? Maybe too comfortable. Caleb noticed her unease but didn't comment. Instead, he nodded toward the corral. If you're feeling up to it, the chickens need feeding. And Mary likes being outside. So Lena tied a blanket around her waist to hold the baby and stepped into the sunlight. It was astonishing how natural it felt cradling Mary against her hip, scattering grain for the chickens, listening to their chatter as the baby squealed happily. Every time Mary laughed, Caleb's gaze softened, pride and gratitude woven together. And every time Lena caught him watching her, she felt warmth creep into her cheeks. A partnership in the making. Over the next 2 days, a quiet partnership formed. Lena swept the floors, helped mend a fence, and cooked supper with what little the pantry held. Caleb split firewood, repaired farm tools, and checked on her wagon each afternoon. They didn't hover around each other, but they moved in an easy rhythm, two people working side by side without needing to speak every thought. Mary adored her. The baby reached for her whenever Lena passed by, cried when she left the room, and fell asleep faster in her arms than in her cradle. It's like she's known you forever, Caleb said once, watching Lena rock Mary by the window. Lena didn't know how to answer that. Didn't know how to explain the warmth that bloomed in her chest every time the baby clung to her. Didn't know how to handle the way Caleb's voice softened when he spoke to her now. The storm had passed, but the quiet days that followed stirred something deeper, something neither of them had expected, and something neither of them wanted to name just yet. By the third day, the sun shone hot and bright, drying the earth and leaving the ranch smelling of dust, hay, and pine. It should have been an easygoing morning. Mary was cheerful, the livestock calm, and even Lena found herself humming as she hung laundry on the line. For the first time in weeks, she felt something dangerously close to contentment. But peace on the frontier rarely lasted long. Caleb had ridden out early to check the creek and look for the calf that had been spooked during the storm. Lena stayed behind, tending to Mary and finishing chores she insisted on helping with. As she pegged the last shirt on the line, she heard the faint rumble of hooves. At first she thought Caleb had returned, but the sound was wrong, too heavy, too many horses. Her stomach tightened. She scanned the horizon just as 3 riders emerged from the trail, dust pluming behind them. They weren't ranch hands. She could tell instantly. These men sat their horses like they owned every piece of land their boots touched. The one in front was tall with a silver-streaked beard and a long coat that flapped behind him like a predator's shadow. Even at a distance, something in his posture radiated arrogance. Lena stepped instinctively between Mary's cradle placed outside in the shade and the approaching riders. The lead man reined in his horse before her. His gaze swept the yard, then lingered on her soaking wet hair from washing, sleeves rolled up, apron tied around her waist. His smirk sharpened. "Well, he drawled. Caleb Harwood's place certainly got itself a new decoration. Lena's jaw tightened. She didn't answer. She had learned long ago that some men saw silence as strength and others as challenge. Either way, she wouldn't give him more than necessary. The man tipped his hat. "Name's Holt Maddox," he said. "This land used to border mine." And ought to again. That name sent a little jolt through her. Caleb had mentioned Maddox before, never kindly. A cattle baron who believed the whole valley should belong to him. A man who didn't like being told no. Lena straightened. "Caleb isn't here." Maddox's eyes gleamed. "Shame. I was hoping for a word." "He's been refusing a very generous offer again." One of his men snorted. "A damn fool offer," he muttered. "Caleb ought to know when he's beat." Lena kept her voice calm. "I'll let him know you stopped by." "Oh, I think he'll know," Maddox said, leaning forward on his saddle horn. "Because I'll be back. And next time, I won't just be stopping by." A chill slithered through her, not from his words alone, but from the look in his eyes. That hungry, possessive glint. The kind that came from a man who believed everything he wanted was owed to him, including land, including people. Mary whimpered softly from her cradle. Maddox's gaze flicked toward the sound. "Heard he got himself a babe. Shame for a child to be raised in a place that's bound to fall." His smile widened with cruel amusement. "Storms aren't the only danger out here." Before Lena could respond, the men wheeled their horses and galloped away, kicking up dust in their wake. Caleb returned to tension 20 minutes later. Caleb rode back into the yard, a bundle of dry branches over one shoulder. His expression shifted instantly when he saw Lena's pale face and stiff posture. "What happened?" he demanded, dismounting. She swallowed. 3 men came. Holt Maddox was leading them. Caleb's jaw hardened. "What did he say?" "That he'd be back." She met his eyes, voice steady despite her trembling. "And that you're refusing his offers." Caleb cursed under his breath. A rare thing. He's been after this ranch for years. Thinks everyone's afraid of him, and most are. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Did he threaten you?" "Only with what he didn't need to say out loud." Caleb's eyes darkened, protective and fierce. "You should have been nowhere near him." "I'm sorry, Lena. I should have been here." She shook her head. "You can't be in 2 places at once." But the moment felt heavier than explanation. This ranch wasn't just struggling, it was under pressure. And she, just by being here, had become part of that weight. Mary fussed then, breaking the tension. Caleb scooped her up, pressing a kiss to the baby's forehead with instinctive tenderness. Lena watched, heart twisting. Danger had found the ranch. But she wasn't sure whether that scared her more, or the growing truth that she didn't want to leave it. The next morning dawn's gray and cold, a thin mist rising off the pasture like the land itself is holding its breath. Lena wakes early, unable to shake the unease that settled in her chest after Holt Maddox's first visit. She brews coffee in the quiet kitchen while Caleb is outside tending to the livestock, checking every latch and gate with an anxious thoroughness that tells her he barely slept. Baby Mary babbles softly in her cradle, unaware that the world outside her warm little cocoon is tightening like a noose around her father. Lena steps out onto the porch and watches Caleb in the yard, his back straight and rigid. For days she has seen him worn, tired, burdened, but this is different. This is the posture of a man preparing for a fight he never wanted. By noon, the wind shifts, the kind of shift that makes the birds go silent, the kind that warns trouble is coming long before it crests the horizon. Caleb senses it too. He gathers Mary into his arms and looks toward the long dirt road leading to the ranch. When dust begins to lift in the distance, his jaw turns to stone. "Holt," he mutters. And he's not alone. Lena steps forward, her pulse thudding in her throat. 3 riders appear first, men rough-looking and broad, clearly hired muscle. Then comes Holt Maddox himself, sitting tall on a glossy black gelding, dressed like a man who believes the land already belongs to him. His smile is thin, smug, cruel. Caleb tries to hand Mary to Lena, but the baby clings to him with quiet whimpers. He adjusts her on his hip and walks out to meet the riders, keeping himself steady even as the odds tower against him. Lena follows him, every instinct screaming that she should stay back, yet some deeper instinct pushing her forward. She refuses to be the helpless woman shivering beside her wagon ever again. Holt reins in a few feet from them, tilting his hat in mock politeness. "Harwood," he calls, "I gave you time to think. Hope you made the right decision." Caleb's voice is low and steady. "My answer hasn't changed. I'm not selling." Holt's gaze slides to Lena, slow and deliberate, as if she's something left out on a roadside shelf. "Didn't know you'd taken on a stray," he sneers. "Be a shame if she got caught in something dangerous." Lena feels the heat rise in her face, but instead of shrinking back, she steps beside Caleb, matching his stance, lifting her chin. "I don't scare easy," she says, surprising even herself with the clarity of her voice. "And I don't run." Caleb's eyes flick toward her, startled and grateful. Holt's eyes narrow. One of Holt's hired men shifts in his saddle, resting a hand a little too casually near his holster. Caleb lifts Mary higher in his arms, protective instincts flaring. Lena glances at the barn, at the tools lined inside, at the kitchen window where she knows a rifle rests above the frame. If this becomes violence, she's ready to defend this place, even if it isn't hers. "This ranch isn't for sale," Caleb says again, firmer now. "Now leave." For a long moment, the air vibrates with the threat of things going very wrong. Holt leans forward in his saddle, his expression hardening into something colder. "You're making a mistake, Harwood. A man alone doesn't last long out here." Caleb doesn't flinch. "I'm not alone." Lena's heart knocks against her ribs. He means her, and he says it like a vow. Holt's men shift uneasily, sensing the certainty beneath Caleb's words. Holt gives a frustrated huff, jerks his reins, and finally wheels his horse around. "This isn't over," he snaps. But as the riders retreat, the tension in the yard loosens just a little. Caleb exhales shakily. Lena steps closer. Mary quiets, nestling against her father. They didn't just face Holt Maddox. They faced him together. And something unspoken settles between them, something that feels dangerously, beautifully like belonging. The days after Holt Maddox's visit were filled with quiet vigilance. Caleb checked fences, reinforced gates, and kept a watchful eye on the horizon. Lena helped in every way she could, feeding livestock, mending broken tools, even teaching Mary little songs that made the baby giggle despite the tension that still clung to the ranch. But beneath the rhythm of daily chores, Lena's mind churned. The repaired wagon waited patiently outside, its wooden wheels polished, axle sturdy, ready to carry her away from this place, the ranch, the storm, the man who had become more than a stranger to her. Every fiber of her body screamed caution. To stay here was to risk more than she had ever risked in her life, her heart. One evening, after supper, Lena carried Mary to the back porch to watch the sunset. The baby babbled happily in her arms, oblivious to the lingering shadows of fear that had crept into the adults' hearts. Lena rocked Mary gently, watching her little hands reach for the colors of the sky, and for a moment allowed herself to imagine leaving, starting over again somewhere she could remain anonymous, invisible, safe. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of Caleb approaching from the barn. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, his face shadowed by the fading light. He didn't speak immediately, simply watched as Lena held the baby. In the silence, she felt the weight of all she hadn't said pressing down on her. "I fixed the last fence post," he said finally, his voice low. "Everything's secure." "For now," Lena nodded, avoiding his gaze. "Good." The single word felt hollow. Good, she thought, but everything else was not so simple. She wanted safety, yes, but she had grown too attached. Mary's laughter clung to her, the warmth of the hearth, the quiet moments of shared work with Caleb, all of it had rooted her unexpectedly, irrevocably. Her gaze fell to the wagon sitting quietly under the trees, waiting to whisk her back to independence. Tonight, she had a choice. Continue the lonely path she had carved for herself, or step into a life she could no longer imagine leaving behind. Caleb shifted, his shadow stretching across the porch as the sun dipped lower. "You're quiet tonight," he said. "Something on your mind?" Lena felt the knot of fear tighten in her chest. I could leave," she said softly, almost to herself. "My wagon's ready. I can go at first light." Caleb's brow furrowed, but he remained calm. "You don't have to go," he said simply, not pleading, not demanding, just stating a truth. "I know," she whispered, holding Mary tighter. I need to be sure I'm not staying because I'm scared to be alone." "You're not," Caleb said. He stepped closer, his presence steady and unyielding. "You're staying because you want to, because you belong here, because Mary and we need you." The words struck her, not as pressure but as promise. The ache of the past, the weight of choices made in fear, all seemed to dissolve in the warmth of his gaze. She looked down at the baby in her arms and felt the pull of a life that was no longer just hers alone. Tears pricked the corners of her eyes as she made her choice. She had been wandering for freedom, for autonomy, for safety, but now she realized that some kinds of freedom were found in belonging, in shared lives, in the courage to trust and love again. Lena straightened, lifting her eyes to Caleb. "I'll stay," she said, her voice firm but soft. "I want to stay. With both of you." Caleb's face softened, relief and quiet joy mixing in his features. He stepped closer, carefully taking Mary into his arms. "Then it's settled," he said, smiling down at them both. "This is your home now. Ours together." As the sun slipped beneath the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of orange and rose, Lena felt a calm she hadn't known in months. The wagon would wait, but she would not. She had made her choice. She had chosen connection, family, and love over loneliness and uncertainty. And for the first time in a long while she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. The night fell softly over the Harwood Ranch, a velvet darkness pierced only by the soft glow of the hearth inside and the silver of the moon reflected on the dew-kissed pastures. The storm from days past was only a memory now, leaving behind the scent of wet earth and pine, a freshness that made the world seem reborn. Yet inside the house, a quieter storm had been brewing, one of hearts and unspoken fears. Lena sat near the fire, Mary curled against her chest, her tiny hand clutching Lena's finger as she slept. For a long while, Lena just watched the flickering flames, feeling their warmth seep through the chill in her bones and into the cold corners of her heart. She thought of the wagon, now repaired and standing quietly outside, ready to take her away if she so chose. She had chosen to stay, but even with that choice made, doubt gnawed at her. Was she doing this because she wanted to, or because she feared being alone again? The creak of the floorboards announced Caleb's presence before he spoke. He leaned in the doorway, watching her and Mary, the firelight highlighting the lines of weariness and hope on his face. In his hands he carried a blanket, soft and warm, a small comfort against the cool night air. But it wasn't the blanket that held meaning, it was the gesture, quiet, unassuming, protective. "Lena," he said softly, not demanding attention, just stating her name like a tether. She looked up, meeting his eyes. Something unspoken passed between them, recognition, trust, and something deeper, more tender. Caleb stepped closer, placing the blanket over Lena's shoulders. His hand lingered briefly at the nape of her neck. "You've done more than help around this place," he said. "You've brought warmth, not just to Mary or the ranch. To me. I can't imagine this house without you in it." Lena's throat tightened. The truth she had been running from, the fear of attachment, the quiet ache of longing, They all surfaced at once. She wanted to speak, to deny it, to protect herself, but she found no words strong enough, no shield left to raise. Her heart knew what her mind had only just begun to accept. Caleb's gaze softened further. He lowered himself to sit beside her on the hearth's edge, careful not to disturb the sleeping baby. His hand found hers, their fingers intertwining naturally as if they had always belonged together. "You don't have to be alone anymore," he murmured, voice low but steady. "Not ever. Not in this house, not on this land, not in my life." Lena swallowed hard, feeling tears prick her eyes. I don't know if I deserve this," she whispered. "I've been running for so long." "You deserve it," Caleb said simply, his thumb brushing hers gently. "You've earned it. You've earned safety. You've earned love, and I swear, from here on, you'll never sleep alone again." The words were like sunlight breaking through a storm cloud. Lena felt a warmth she hadn't felt in months, no, years spread through her chest, settling the tremor in her hands and the ache in her heart. She leaned closer, resting her head briefly against his shoulder, savoring the quiet strength he offered. Mary stirred slightly, then nestled further into Lena's arms, as if affirming the bond forming around her. Caleb watched them, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth, eyes soft but shining with a mixture of relief and joy. The ranch, once just a place of survival, now felt like home in the truest sense, a place of connection, of family, of belonging. They sat together like that for long moments, the fire crackling, the moonlight spilling across the floor, and the past storm reduced to a distant memory. The tension, the fear, the loneliness, they had all been replaced by this presence, trust, and a bond that could not easily be broken. Finally, Lena lifted her gaze, meeting Caleb's with quiet certainty. "Then I'm staying," she said, her voice steady. "Here, with you? And Mary, with all of you." Caleb's smile broadened. "Good," he said, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Then this is where you belong. And I'll see to it every day that you never have to face the night alone." Outside, the ranch lay quiet, under a sky washed clean by storms. Inside, a new kind of warmth filled the house, not just from fire or blankets, but from hearts entwined and a promise kept. Lena's long journey had ended not in isolation, but in the safe, unwavering presence of family. And in that moment, she finally understood the truth of Caleb's words. She would never sleep alone again.